Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism. It's my honor to convene this daily conversation. We're in New York City, where we're on lockdown for almost 100 days. Today is day number 97, and we've been on the air for 97 straight days. We are only been able to do that. We've only been able to do that because of all of you, the incredible support we've had from all over the world. And we know you're watching from all over the world right now. Tell us where you're watching from. Please go into your comments and tell us, and also tell us how you're doing. Please share your questions or your comments. We are going to be talking about the First Amendment today, and we have lots to share about the First Amendment, as well as the three crises we're trying to track. We're trying to understand the healthcare crisis, the financial crisis, and the racial inequality crisis. So please do share and tag. We're live right now on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on LinkedIn. And we're just very grateful that you're all here. I'd also like to thank our producers, Rose Horowitz, who's tweeting at Rose Horowitz 31, and also Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. So thanks very much to both of them for all the work that they've done to get us here. So first, let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing tonight. We have a great show for you. We are going to be talking about an interview that I did with Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn earlier today, just about 4 hours ago. And we're going to be bringing you excerpts from that interview, the excerpts are going to highlight the conversation we had. And I'm joined live by Laurie White-Taricani. She is the wife of her late husband, Jim Taricani, a pioneering investigative journalist who died in June 2019. And Laurie and the family have endowed the inaugural Taricani lecture series on First Amendment rights at the University of Rhode Island. So today I did the interview with Nick and Sheryl, and we're going to be replaying some of the comments and questions and sharing them with all of you. So please stay tuned for that fabulous conversation and to meet Laurie White-Taricani. We are having a great run of shows as we get to show number 100, which is this coming Friday. So let's tell you what we've done. On Sunday, we met Peter Herford, distinguished journalist and my former professor. Last night, we spoke to Suman Pendakur, director of the USC Equity Institutes. We are today talking about the First Amendment with Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn. And then on Wednesday, we are meeting New York City Parks Commissioner Mitchell Silver. On Thursday, we're going to interview WHO's chief scientist live here with Dr. Sylvie Bryan, who's the director of pandemics of WHO. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan is WHO's chief scientist. And then on Friday is our 100th episode. We're also marking Juneteenth, which is a holiday that is marked by the African-American community, but not by many other folks. I know I've never marked it, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, but today, this week, we will be able to do that. And we'll be joined by several guests, including Jonathan Borstein, who has watched by then 100 straight episodes with us, our most loyal viewer. And we'll be joined by Professor Nolwe Brooks, who's the W.E.B. Du Bois Professor of Literature at Cornell University, and Brandy Harden, who's a lawyer and board member at Justice Aid. So we have a very full week, and we're just so grateful to everyone who has come in to help us and to help us tell our stories of COVID-19 and everything that's happened in these last 3 months. Before we start, we of course have to thank our sponsors, and we want to start by thanking our friends at Art & Co. Get involved with the world's largest art auction fundraising for COVID-19 victims, artandco.net, artandco.net, the world's largest online art auction for COVID-19 victims. More than 31 separate artists will benefit, as will 7 charities that are doing incredible work. So please do check them out. We are also sponsored by globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org. globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org. It's a virtual teen camp at Rutgers University, and there are 2 separate weeks that you can choose and pick one or the other. 20% off with code SREE. SREE. Learn from top entrepreneurs and startup experts from Cognizant, Angie's List, Google, Facebook, and many others. And finally, we also want to tell you about Muckrack Academy, letting me put together the fundamentals of social media, a free certification course launching tomorrow at 11 a.m. It's on demand, so you don't have to tune in at 11 a.m. You can take it anytime, and it's open to folks of all backgrounds, all experience levels, any industry. It says journalists and PR pros, but anyone who wants to get better at social should watch. It's a free certification course, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. And almost 4,000 people have already signed up for that course, and you can take it in a couple of hours or over a couple of months. It doesn't matter, and you can get a free certification, mrac.co/social. And finally, we also want to tell you about our special Father's Day offer on the New York Times Read Along. This week, we have a fabulous guest. Tom Jolly will be here. Tom is the print editor of the New York Times, and he and I will talk about how they put together the print New York Times. And as part of Father's Day, and then in the evening, the Father's Day Project, we will be giving you a chance to thank a father figure or grandfather, uncle, male role model, someone in your life on Father's Day. You submit a picture and a message, we read it on the air. How simple is that? We did that for Mother's Day, and we had more than 25 people sign up, and 50% of those proceeds went to Nick Kristof's favorite charity, the C19 project from Nick that he's working on. And this time we're going to give the money to a charity that is the favorite of our guest, Tom Jolly, the print editor of the New York Times. So go to digimentors.link/Father's Day, digimentors.link/Father's Day, or just email me if you are not clear, sree@sree.net. So thank you all for being here. Today, we are going to listen to my interview earlier today with Nick Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn, and we're going to talk to Laurie White-Taricani about the crusading work that her husband, investigative reporter Jim Taricani, did in Rhode Island. He passed away last year, and she has endowed a series of lectures in his name about the First Amendment. So let me bring Laurie on, and then we'll get to listen to Nick and Sheryl. So let me bring Laurie on right now. Hi, Laurie.
Hi, Sree. Great to be here tonight.
We were just together a few hours ago listening to Nick and Sheryl. I'll ask you the same question that I ask all my guests. How are you doing? And I know we're coming up on the anniversary of Jim's passing, so this is a difficult week, I'm sure, in addition to everything else that's going on.
Sure. Well, I am in Rhode Island. I am doing well. I am feeling well. And I'm really grateful that we are able to come together to talk about this issue because it's such an important one. It's a serious one, and one that my husband and I feel very strongly about. So it was a great discussion earlier today with Nick and Sheryl, and they have been on the front lines of these issues for their entire careers. And they have written about Jim. And so that's why I thought it would be really appropriate to have Nick and Sheryl as our inaugural guests. So thank you, Sree, for doing a great job and leading that discussion on the First Amendment and how we talked about all of these issues today being somewhat entwined.
Yeah, it was really great to see Nick and Sheryl, who are always great speakers. We've both been in venues listening to them, and I've interviewed them before. And what they were able to share with us was just perfect in terms of what we need to understand. So Laurie, tell us about the First Amendment, why it's important in the middle of everything else that's going on. We decided that we have to tell the story of the First Amendment through the lens of what's happening today.
Yes. So Jim was guided strongly by the First Amendment during his 40-year career as a journalist, and he knew that protecting those rights is critically important, not only for the profession of journalism, but for all of us. And to quote Nick Kristof directly, Nick says that it's part of the flow of information is really the circulatory system of our democracy. And Nick has written about that extensively. So the First Amendment privilege being an essential American value of free press and other aspects that fall within. Yeah,
Sorry,
to
go
be a
ahead.
watchdog. Yeah, and to be a watchdog for society. So it's the only profession to be explicitly called out in the Constitution. So it's a very special privilege.
Thank you. So let's now watch just the one of the segments where we talk about why this matters, and we'll just set this up for us. And it was a very special question asked by Dana Kelch. Tell us who she is, too.
Diana Kelch was Jim's longtime investigative unit partner at WJR-TV in Providence. So Jim founded the station's I-Team 30 or so years ago. And over the course of many years, he and Diana ultimately came to be partners on the I-Team and to be the talent for the work that they did. And together they won a lot of major journalism awards, and they were excellent team in terms of putting forth really responsible, honest, ethical, factual, accurate journalism.
And that is so nice that it was a nice touch that she was with us, Laurie, to see Diana there. So she asked a very good question. How would you rate the media's ability to do its job both in the pandemic and the crisis of race? Is it able to be a watchdog? Has it lost the confidence of the people? Has the media been part of the fumble? So let's pick up where they were answering that question. And again, folks, you're watching my interview with Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn, and we're also joined by Laurie White-Taricani, who helped set up the Taricani Lecture Series at University of Rhode Island. Okay, here we go. Sorry, 1 second. And now. And has it lost the confidence of the people? What do you think about that question?
You know, what I worry about is that, Jim Taricani, when he took on organized crime, so he was supported by the First Amendment, but he was also supported by a business model that paid him to investigate things. And the truth is that the business model is collapsing for much of the media around the country. And so we have news deserts in many parts of the country. We have many places where there is no reporter who is going to school board meetings, who's going to city council meetings. And in covering race, for example, okay, we have news organizations that will cover some particular crisis that erupts the previous day, but we are shorter of the resources to do real data investigations of differentials and arrests of African-American and white journalists, for example, because that's harder to do, it's more expensive, it doesn't lead to a lot of clicks. The disparities with Native Americans deeply trouble me. You have counties in South Dakota and North Dakota that have a shorter life expectancy than either Cambodia or Bangladesh. And that's because those are disproportionately Native American counties. That seems to me unconscionable. And yet, and I reported on COVID in Navajo Nation. If you counted Native American tribes as states, then 5 of the 6 states with the greatest infections would be native tribes. And the Navajo Nation has had more infections per capita than New York State has. And I think that these are a lot harder issues to cover because there's less of a natural audience for them because they're more expensive, and the business model has been eroding, except for the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, the big networks. And so I guess that's that's one of my biggest concerns.
Thank you. We see here, Bill Bartholomew says we need a Taricani statue, something I've called for over a decade. Put it up outside of Supreme Court of Rhode Island. So there, that was, so tell us your reaction first to hear Laurie, Nick and Sheryl together, and that comment about your late husband, Jim Taricani.
Well, Sree, I was really struck by the notion of news deserts that Nick and Sheryl were talking about, and that's such a pernicious force. And we have to think about having a wide variety of media available for Americans to understand what's going on in their own communities, in their own towns, and frankly, to hold government officials accountable. So why that's so important is because the fewer newspapers we have and the fewer media outlets that we have, and the concentration of media outlets is not good for the proliferation of a lot of voices that are necessary. And the other point is, when Jim had his case, which again was litigated within the federal jurisdiction, the federal courts, he was he had access to huge amount of resources because WJR-TV, the NBC 10 affiliate in Providence, was part of, at the time, the NBC Universal family. So access to amazing lawyers, access to a corporate entity that was willing to stand for the First Amendment and to fund his legal fees, and also to fund the fines that accrued at the rate of $1,000 a day, because Jim was not willing to reveal the source of a leaked videotape. So that brings us back to the notion of having large media outlets that, we were very fortunate to have the resources, the corporate resources, to be able to bring this challenge forward. But in places and communities that are very fragile economically, and in these times when newspapers in particular are very fragile, reporters and journalists in small towns may not have access to these kinds of resources, and frankly are very much in jeopardy and can be jeopardized for simply doing their job. And that's what Jim always said. So the ability to be able to bring these issues forward and galvanize a whole national and perhaps international conversation on the importance of the First Amendment, on the importance of a free press, and on the importance of having a free flow of information and being able to protect sources without being abused, without being jailed or imprisoned, without being fined, and without being, hurt, quite frankly. So this is an issue that resonates all around the world.
So it certainly does, and we have people watching all over the world right now. Let's go to the beginning of our interview with Nick and Sheryl. Anybody who's joining us right now, Laurie and I arranged and were able to do an interview, public interview that was shared on my Facebook and Twitter. So if you want to watch the whole thing, just go back on my Facebook and Twitter, or go to University of Rhode Island, Harrington School social channels, and you can find them. You can find the full video there. And but what we're doing tonight is, and that was just about four hours ago, so Laurie and I are going to play parts of the interview with Sheryl and Nick and kind of comment about what are the things they said. So anybody who wants to see the full thing, you can very easily find it on my Facebook and also on my Twitter. So let's first just go in and play a little bit of the beginning of our interview, which started with students telling us about the power of the First Amendment. So I'm just going to pull that up here so that everybody can watch along with us. So let's see if I can get the right one. And let me just pull this up. This is hard to do when you're hosting and trying to do this at the same time. So I want to make sure I get the correct moment that we'd like to show everybody. So just one more second. Sorry about that, folks. This is why you need a whole team of folks who are doing this kind of work, and we had that for the show earlier. All right, here we go. So these are students in the class of 2021, the University of Rhode Island, who are going to ask questions, and then we're going to hear directly from Nick and Sheryl. Here we go.
I'm a rising senior at URI. I'm a triple major in journalism, writing and rhetoric and Italian, and I also act as the editor-in-chief of the Good 5 Cent Cigar newspaper on campus. The First Amendment is so important to me. It's what allows me to do my job, to be a voice for the voiceless and a monitor of power. And it also allows me to tell the wonderful stories of people that are also practicing their First Amendment rights, especially in a time like now when people are protesting and speaking up against the injustice and the racism throughout the United States.
Thank you, and we have another video.
Hi everyone, my name is Imani Fleming and I am a rising sophomore at the University of Rhode Island. I'm a journalism major with a political science minor, and I'm also a staff reporter for our school newspaper. I want to talk a little bit about what the First Amendment means to me, because to me it is the literal backbone of being able to call myself a student journalist. It not only allows myself and my peers to report and write on the issues that we're passionate about, but also on the issues that are essential to the URI community. More recently, I've been able to exercise my First Amendment right by participating in peaceful protests here in Chicago. I consider myself an activist within the Black Lives Matter movement, and I've been able to attend beautifully organized demonstrations fighting against the injustices currently facing the Black community. The First Amendment allows myself and countless others to fight for what they believe in, and it's almost impossible to ignore its significance in our everyday life.
Thank you for those great comments, and I hope you all noticed that both the students are very active, and one of them is a triple major. Now we are pleased to bring onto the screen in just a moment Nick, Kristof, and Sheryl WuDunn. We want everyone, including Nick and Sheryl, to tweet and share the videos from the Harrington School, so make sure all of you are sharing on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We're on all those platforms. We are delighted now to bring on stage to meet you all, our friends, Nick, Kristof, and Sheryl WuDunn.
Hi, Sree.
Hi there.
How are you doing? This is the first thing we ask everybody. How are you? How's your family through everything that we're going through?
We're all safe and well. Thank you very much.
And fortified by those great videos from Teresa and Imani, and and also we're just kind of honored to be here commemorating Jim Taricani, who's reporting, especially on organized crime, we admired, and whose willingness to undergo 6 months of home confinement to protect his sources was also an inspiration to journalists around the world.
Thank you for that. We want to say that you're also clearly fortified by all the books around you. You can see that where you are. I also like that we can see your book right there behind you, the book. Tightrope, Americans Reaching for Hope is one of the best books to understand this moment, but it wasn't written at this moment. It was written when we were told we're having the greatest economy in the history of the world. Your thoughts?
Yes, well, I certainly think that there is a lot that we were writing about in Tightrope that just was so underscored by what happened with the pandemic. Tightrope really focused on a small rural town in Oregon called Yamhill. And I'll let Nick talk a little bit about the people that we wrote about, because a lot of them were his very friends. But we also went around the country and we talked about, we found people who were experiencing the same problem. We had been foreign correspondents overseas, and we had covered a lot of poverty in the developing world. And we would come back to the US once a year on our holidays. And as we started learning more about the people who were living in Yamhill, we would talk to them. They were working on our farm. And we started realizing that there was a humanitarian crisis going on in our own backyard, and we were totally ignoring it because we couldn't believe that there was a humanitarian crisis going on in the wealthiest nation in the world. And so that's how Tightrope was born.
And the reaction that people have had from all over the world reading your book, they've understood a lot more about what's happening in America today. Let's fast forward past the launch of the book to the multiple crises we're going through in America right now. We have a crisis in the financial sector, we have a crisis of the economy, we have a crisis of healthcare, and of course, a crisis around racial justice. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all three of them. And I know, Nick, you've been in the thick of it covering all three.
Yeah, and in many ways, COVID has preyed upon these broader inequities that didn't begin a few months ago, but really began, I think, 50 years ago. And we talk about American exceptionalism, but in many ways, America was actually much more within the framework of other advanced countries through the 1960s. We had the similar health metrics. Government as a share of GDP was similar to other countries. And then the United States kind of systematically began to cut taxes and, I think, to underinvest in its citizens. And it did that in part for racial reasons, because investment in social services, in healthcare, was often stigmatized as disproportionately helping African Americans. And the result was that everybody in the country got hurt, and the country became less competitive with others. And COVID has magnified that. African Americans are dying about 2.5 times the rate of whites from COVID, reflecting comorbidities, reflecting lack of similar access to healthcare. And at the end of the day, the U.S. is the only advanced country in the world that doesn't have universal healthcare, the only advanced country in the world that doesn't have universal paid sick leave. And when you don't have those things, then the entire country becomes less safe. Diseases spread. And one of my hopes is that we will come out of this and not just develop a stronger system to fight pandemics, and not just become more aware of the need to fight systematic racism, but also address 50 years of kind of unequal education, K through 12 education, for example, or the fact that we're the only country that doesn't have some kind of universal childcare, to really address some of these broader inequities that now we are talking about.
So I think that in normal times, it's very easy for people who are sort of in the middle to upper classes to say, oh, yes, it's a shame to have this great inequality, but I'm not sure what difference it makes to society, because there's always going to be people who are going to be less well off and people who are going to be better well off. But in fact, what we're seeing now, what COVID is doing, it is really illustrating why it is so important for all of society to care. We talk about the people who are basically the working class. The working class, it turns out, are the essential workers, because when we talk about the pandemic and how essential workers must still work, are allowed to work when we do self-isolation and quarantining, it's those people in the working class who are delivering our food, who are actually putting groceries on the shelves in stores, that are stocking the warehouses, that are delivering the mail, that are driving the buses to get essential workers to work, or driving the trains. And these are the essential workers that we are finding. And it's not just that, because they also are at more risk of getting the COVID-19. But we're also finding that when you have a spread of infectious diseases, every person counts, no matter whether you are rich or poor. You can spread it, and you can actually protect yourself just as much. Whether you're rich or poor, you have an obligation. You're a part of society, and you actually can play a role in either preventing or actually spreading. And so I think we find that we all should care about the way other people are being treated or mistreated, because it does have an impact on all of society. I mean, we have a very unusual society compared to other peer countries, and it makes it a little bit more difficult for us to impose quarantining the way China does, for instance. But I think that what I hope will come out of this is a recognition among people, the haves, that the haves really need to care a lot more about the have-nots, and so that we need to think about education more for the have-nots, getting rural, basically, fiber, in the same way that we had rural electrification, decades ago. We need to have internet for all. We need broadband, in the rural areas, because we see that, a lot of distance learning doesn't work if you don't have broadband. And those are the people who are afflicted are the people in the working class. So I do think that I hope that a lot of these inequities are not only exposed now in COVID, but actually will be corrected, as we emerge from COVID, the pandemic and the crisis.
Thank you, folks. We have hundreds of people watching right now. So let me pause there, and we'll come back to our conversation with Sheryl and Nick. Hi, folks. You're watching from around the world. We're just glad to have you here. Let me say hello again to Laurie White-Taricani. You folks were watching the Jim Taricani lecture series at the University of Rhode Island, and this is Laurie, who's put together the series in Jim's memory and in his honor. He passed away last year. He was a crusading investigative journalist who Nick and Sheryl wrote about because of the work that he did. Tell us about the unusual case and the circumstances under which he was asked to give up a source and refused to.
Sure. So he got his hands on videotape that showed the number 2 person in City Hall actually taking a cash bribe, so $1,000 cash bribe. And it was an undercover videotape, and Jim, being an investigative television journalist on NBC 10 in Providence, Rhode Island, put that videotape on television for all to see. And what Nick and Sheryl have talked about, in other parts of the lecture, I know that we'll see that, is the notion that using video and referring to video and being able to have video is a way for people to understand that things happen and to validate facts and scenarios. So there's nothing that comes closer than actually seeing a piece of video, and we saw that with the George Floyd situation, and we have seen that countless other times in other scenarios. But as it pertained to the issue that Jim was involved in, it was very startling, very jarring to see the racketeering, if you will, that was endemic at that time, back in the early 2000s, the racketeering of City Hall and the corruption. And so he put that videotape on. A federal judge ultimately wanted to know who his source was, and Jim refused to identify his source because he believed in the right for journalists to be able to protect their sources. And in Rhode Island, there is a state shield law, but it didn't come into play because this was a federal case. So fast forward, after many, back and forth rounds of litigation, Jim was held in civil contempt by a federal district court judge for disobeying a judge's orders, which is to turn over this particular videotape with who gave identifying the source of the videotape. Subsequently, Jim was fined $1,000 a day for refusing day after day after day after day for giving up his source. And he had promised his source confidentiality. So that was the issue there, to show public corruption, to show it very, very vividly. And he had given a promise, and that was to not reveal the name of his source. So ultimately, the judge determined that the $1,000 a day fine wasn't going to change Jim's point of view in terms of giving up the source. So ultimately, the judge after a ruling, a judgment of civil contempt, Jim was sentenced to 6 months of home confinement for this. And Jim said he was fined and found guilty of this simply for doing his job. And there was nothing illegal about what he did. There was nothing that prevented him from putting that piece of videotape on. There was nothing that was untoward in that, but simply for defying the judge's order around the revealing of a confidential source. So Jim was sentenced to 6 months in home confinement. However, I am very confident that Jim would have actually served time in a federal prison were it not for the fact that a number of years prior to that, in 1996, Jim had a lifelong some hereditary heart disease issues, and he had a heart transplant at Mass General Hospital back in 1996. So if you fast forward, this was leading up to 2004. So he had been out as a heart transplant recipient for 8 years or so, and his doctors were very concerned about his ability to, an immune suppressed individual going into prison. So that was part of the pleading in Jim's defense to sentence him to home confinement. So it was a very tense sentencing hearing. It was November 18th, which just happened to have been my birthday in the year 2004. And, after much, commentary from the bench, it was finally, the sentence was 6 months of home confinement. That 6 months ultimately was taken down to 4 months because of good behavior. But think about it in current day terms. So back in 2004, before a lot of the social media was evident, but Jim was denied use of the internet. So no internet, no visitors except during short windows during the course of the day. Could not leave the perimeter of the house. So there was no going to the mailbox to get the mail or going to the driveway to get the newspaper. I once I was going away on a trip, and I had to have neighbors, bring the newspaper, closer to the front door, because if he stepped outside the confines of the front door, then his ankle bracelet would go off. He was subject to random drug testing during the course of the day. So it was a very serious sentence, and Jim took it extremely seriously, and was determined that he would follow the judge's order to the T, and he did. So for that, he was released from home confinement after 4 months. So it was an amazing 4 months to be to have someone at home and to be punished in such a way for simply doing one's job and not violating and not doing anything illegal. So that's sort of the interesting backstory with that. But getting back to what we were talking about earlier, the presence of video, the evidence of video, so people can see it for themselves. And Jim always said that I was willing to do this because I felt it was important that people see what public corruption actually looks like.
Yeah, and obviously that made a big difference in understanding everything about this case also. So let's now watch a little bit of that video, a question that we asked about that video to Nick and Sheryl, and then we have some of the tributes when Jim passed that we will play as well, so that folks can see it. But now, folks, you're going to hear a little bit more of my interview with Nick Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn about 4.5 hours ago. And it was a really great opportunity to hear from these two great journalists and writers. So I'm going to just pull that video onto the screen here right now. And remember, you can watch the full thing. You can go either on my Facebook feed or on my Twitter, and you can find the full video there. So let's bring this up full size. And he always said it was important that people see video to make things real. The irony of airing a videotape, which then, of course, landed Jim in home confinement. That's a comment that came in from Laurie White-Taricani. Tell us about the role that video has played in all of the things that we have seen, not just in the protests, but you also know that people are watching the president and deciding whether to wear a mask or not. That's the state that the world is in now.
Well, of course, you know, coming from print journalism, we think print is really important. But yes, video is incredibly important because I think if we're going to have disputes over facts, at least if we have, you know, something that is the closest semblance of reality, that we will have less disagreement over what is being portrayed in a video. Of course, you can say, oh, the angle is wrong, or the angles, you know, didn't capture the right thing, and there's something off camera that's really going on. You can, you know, come up with all sorts of excuses, but I do think that, you know, video and television can really, really help, you know, focus on facts so we can get the facts straight. But I do think that the worry is that we have so much fact distortion now on both sides that people will see, even in a video, what they want to see based on their political point of view. And I think that it's not just, I mean, video can't solve everything. It really is a starting point. And then it gets back into education. So for instance, what, you know, URI is doing is so critical, you know, to basically educating our young people so that they understand what is the reality, what are facts, and how do we use facts to basically understand what really happened and what should happen in the future.
We have comments coming in from all over, including a comment to Teresa and Imani earlier. John says, hello, all the best to you from the very first editor of Good 5 Cent Cigar. And we have comments here. Jonathan's watching from Union Square. Tell us, folks, where you're watching from. I know our speakers would love to hear. We have comments here from Eduardo, who says, class of 99 here. This is great. Hope it's available to view again later. Absolutely, folks. As soon as we're off the air, this will be available on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. So make sure you check. Let's talk a little bit, please, Nick and Sheryl, about the book and the research that you did in rural America. And that's one of the biggest divides we have in this country. Talk about your own connection to rural America and the research and reporting that Tightrope exposes for the first time for many, many people.
So I'm from the little town of Yamhill, Oregon, that Sheryl mentioned earlier, population 1,000 on a good day. It's an area that had done very well for much of the 20th century. And then jobs kind of went away, and people self-medicated with meth, with heroin, with alcohol. And so a quarter of the kids on my old number 6 school bus have died from what are called deaths of despair, drugs, alcohol, and suicide. And this is something that we're seeing indeed in much of the country. You know, it's the same pattern in Kentucky or northern Maine. And I'd also say that there are real commonalities between what happened in lily white places like Yamhill, Oregon, and in a lot of African-American communities somewhat earlier. You know, in white areas like Yamhill back in the 1990s, there were a lot of pejorative comments about struggles in African-American communities. And people talked about how the problem was what they called Black culture and about deadbeat dads. And meanwhile, a great African-American sociologist at Harvard, William Julius Wilson, said, no, it's about jobs leaving. And he was exactly right, because when jobs left white areas like Yamhill or left Maine or West Virginia, you saw the same patterns unfolded. And one of the lessons to us was that when people lose jobs, then that is not only a loss of income, but maybe even more important, it's a loss of identity, of self-esteem. that is maybe harder to rectify than that loss of income. And I think it's worth bearing that in mind at a time when up to 40 million Americans have lost their jobs because of the COVID-related crisis. And of course, the US response to COVID contrasts with that of Europe, where there was a great effort to preserve jobs. In contrast, the US effort was to provide a stream of unemployment benefits, but not to keep those jobs. I think that was a historic mistake and will make it harder to recover from that crisis down the road.
Yeah, I think that it's important to recognize that other countries are doing things, our peer countries are doing things in a different way. And there's another example that I want to hark back to that happened during the financial crisis, after the financial crisis, when the automakers had actually laid off auto workers, both in Detroit, but also in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. So we had a nice comparison. And so what happened in Detroit was that people got unemployment benefits. They got a little bit more than normal because of the circumstances, but they also lost their jobs because they lost their insurance, health insurance, because that went with their jobs. So there was a huge burden on those families, a double burden, because they lost their job, but they also lost their health insurance. Over in Canada, of course, they did lose their jobs, but they didn't lose their health insurance because there's national health insurance in Canada. And on top of that, the government stepped in and said, wait a second, let's see where there is a need for jobs in Windsor. And they looked at the different industries and they saw that nursing had a huge need. And so they actually facilitated training programs for these laid off auto workers to learn more about nursing so that they actually can start getting jobs in the nursing field where there were jobs. And look, it's probably not their dream job, but they were reemployed much more quickly and ushered back into the workforce, so they didn't suffer the things that Nick was speaking of, a loss of purpose, no sense of mission, in addition to no income and no health insurance. So there wasn't this pile-on that, American workers had faced. And I think that's a lesson for what's going on right now in COVID as well, is that, there are remedies, there are solutions that can be deployed, and we shouldn't just think about the old ways of doing things. Okay, give them unemployment, or extend the unemployment benefits. There are other things that the government can.
Sorry that the audio is not so clear, but you understand that. I think everybody heard the difference between Canada and America at this time. Let me bring back Laurie White-Taricani onto the stage here. Hi, Laurie. That stark contrast between America and its promise and what it could do for its people and what it promises its people and what Canada was able to do was just one of the many stunning ways that we were contrasting America and its place in the world, weren't we?
Well, what I found really insightful from them was the discussion that they, lead us through in their book about the importance of education and what the power of education can do to families and individuals and an educated society. And that ties right back into the First Amendment, because in order to have a free country, in order to have democracy, in order to truly be free, we must first be educated, we must be knowledgeable, we must understand civics, we must understand how our government works. And that's what journalists deliver on a day-to-day basis, whether they're reporting in community newspapers or large, institutional legacy publications like the New York Times, or whether it's, very well-established and credible broadcast media outlets. There's a place for this. And we need to preserve it, because we need to continue to believe that our education and our livelihood is dependent on that, not just for the sake of our own democracy, but again, getting back to being educated, to be able to understand and to have a job and to have ability to have an upward career and mobility, and to be able to withstand economic downturns like we're in right now. And also, I would add, to fundamentally understand and being able to think critically about information that comes at people that could potentially be downright false, biased, inaccurate, misleading. So to be educated is really essential as well, to be able to sift through varying points of view, varying opinions, but also think critically about information that may be entirely false. And that's something that journalists bring to us on a day-to-day basis. And our journalism schools all across the nation, and Sree, I know you were a very prominent academic and dean at Columbia School of Journalism for many years. But back when I was in journalism school, and maybe up to a few years ago, some of the issues around contemporary journalism were a little bit more cut and dry in terms of telling both sides of the story and being balanced. But now we hear from prominent journalists like Nick and Sheryl, and also Christiane Amanpour, that it's a little bit more than that at this point, and it's about truth telling and not just ping ponging with one side here and one side there. You have to go with the best information that you have and use your own sensibilities to be able to distill information that may in fact be patently false. So that's why all of these issues are, very interestingly intertwined today in 2020, and the COVID-19 crisis and the financial crisis and the racial injustice crisis, they all have at their roots some of these same fundamental issues. And that's why it's so important to think about it in a new way today and to teach today's students. And I was so amazed and just really proud of the young students at the University of Rhode Island who responded to the challenge of, to say what the First Amendment means to them, and the critical work that they're doing as students to understand society as it has transformed today, the way it is today, when we do in fact have a divided nation. But I think it's even more important now for schools of journalism to be able to teach potential journalists and also teach the citizenry how to evaluate information critically and to really understand how to get to the truth.
I think you're absolutely right. And we want to just say hello to everyone. We had such a great conversation, and bringing Nick and Sheryl, that we forgot to do our global tour. So let's say hi to everybody. I know you've been part of the tour before, folks. If you're just watching, this is episode 97 of our daily COVID-19 show. And we're gearing up for our big 100th show coming up on Friday. And I'll tell you all about it. But in the meantime, let's say hello to Anand Babu from India. Jacqueline Dolly is watching. Good evening. And Jacqueline will be my guest on Saturday night. And we are going to have a terrific conversation around so many issues that are affecting America today. Jonathan Borstein is here. He's watched for 90 now. There will be 100 shows, but he's watched for 98 shows. Let's see. Monica is watching from Watermill, New York. Hi, Monica. Marketing Monica is her Twitter handle. Sonali says, wow, 97 shows. Someone's watching from Boston. And Jeevan says, a love from India. Sudha's watching from Hastings-on-Hudson. Laurie is watching from Westchester County. And so these are all people that you're familiar with by watching the show. Good morning from India, Sonu. Nice to be here. Paula Kiger is here, our terrific colleague who does the New York Times read-along. I'm going to use this opportunity to remind everyone, every Sunday for 5 years, we've been reading the Sunday New York Times out loud, the print edition, like crazy people. And in it, in the show, we have great guests, often from the New York Times. And this Sunday, the print editor of the New York Times, Tom Jolly, will be here. It's going to be a fabulous day because he was with us last year, Laurie, in his home in New Jersey. We drove up there, Neil Parekh and I, and we interviewed him. Imagine sitting at his kitchen table and eating breakfast and reading the print New York Times. There's nothing like that feeling in the world. And our friend Carla Baranakis, former copy chief of the New York Times, the national copy chief, she brought bagels, and we were sitting there. It was like a life highlight. And this time it'll be a virtual version, but he will be here this coming Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody, please join us. And we're also celebrating Father's Day that day. So we have a Father's Day promotion that anyone who is watching and wants to participate, you want to send a greeting to any father figure in your life. you can do that. 50% of the proceeds will go to Tom Jolly's charity that he has picked out. So everyone, please do sign up for this. We would be very grateful if you just go to digimentors.link/Father's Day, digimentors.link/Father's Day. A father figure, grandfather, uncle, male role model, with us or not with us, please do give them a shout out. I'll be celebrating my father, who's in Kerala and often watches us. And we'll have Neil Parekh will be saying hello to his dearly departed father, Prakash Parekh, who I knew better than I knew Neil for many years. He was a pioneering Indian American journalist and publisher. And when he passed away, one of his requests was that he be cremated with the Sunday edition of the New York Times. And that's it is an amazing story that now Neil, as executive editor of the Sunday New York Times Read Along, is able to continue to pay tribute to his father every single Sunday. So please join us on Sunday for that conversation. Let's see who else is here from around the world watching. And I was saying that Paula is one of our producers on that show. And Rose Horowitz is here, one of our producers. She is terrific. Please follow her at Rose Horowitz 31. Also Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon, who is one of our producers on the show. We don't get to 97 straight days of shows without great producers, and they were just absolutely terrific, working so hard every day and inspiring me to be able to do the work that we do. And Rick asks, will you share links of the talks? So the links of the talks will be in the Facebook post, so you can find them, but they're also on my Facebook feed and on my Twitter feed, or just look for the Harrington School of Media and Communication there at the University of Rhode Island. You can find that. Radyan says, good evening from Center Reach, Long Island. Let me ask Laurie, if any of these places you want to reminisce about in terms of cities or towns that you know, please feel free to jump in. Mindy says she watched with her husband and a URI alum. It was great. So that's awesome. Mindy is part of our online family here, and that connection to URI is terrific. And I'm just so glad. And Mark Lee, who's always with us, says, hope all is going well over there. And we are learning a lot and sharing a lot. And Sudha, who is Neil's mother and Prakash's wife, says, print media will have financial problems when we have economic crisis. After 9/11, few newspapers closed down because it was difficult to survive with limited financial resources. Absolutely. And Paula says, I really love hearing from these students. We brought in some student clips, which we saw earlier. So many, look at all these comments coming in from all over. Tawfiq says, I watch every day. Good job, keep it up. Thank you so much. Jacqueline says, I love the embrace of truth telling. And Jacqueline, who will be my guest on Saturday, we're so delighted that she'll be here. I like the idea of citizen journalists too. It would be great to teach communities how to tell and amplify their own stories. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I want everybody in the world to be better at social media. And that's why I'm working with our friends at Muckrack to create a free social media fundamentals course that everybody in the world can join tomorrow. It launches tomorrow, but you can watch it anytime. It's sort of like Netflix. Free certification course coming June 21st. mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. You'll learn the basics of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And just go to mrac.co/social. 4,000 people almost have signed up, and we're very excited. We think we will go well over that number who sign up, and you can finish it in 2 hours or 2 days or 2 months. You get to pick how you want to do that. And Laurie's on Twitter, by the way. You should follow her on Twitter. She is LW_Prov Chambers. So please find and follow her on Twitter as well. We should talk a minute about your day job and what you do when you're not fighting for the First Amendment.
Sure. I am the president of the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, and we represent business interests and economic development interests, and we work to strengthen our local economy so folks have jobs and good career upward mobility. We're very strong advocates for great public schools, and our urban schools in Providence are a bit challenged, but our business community is right there to be advocates, to be supporters, to help our kids in this new environment and distance learning, and closing the achievement gap. So there's a lot of fragility, not just all across this country, but, particularly in parts of New England that are urban areas. Providence was at one point the most prosperous city in the nation back in the late 1800s, and because of manufacturing and the like, but and in the intervening years, like in the 70s, had fallen on some tough times. So the importance of having a strong economic backbone, having strong schools. We have great colleges and universities in Providence, some of the most prominent anywhere, along with our public institutions of higher education, including the University of Rhode Island, where I went, and that's sponsoring this lecture program. So together, we are a strong community, and we have been somewhat hard hit by COVID because we are along the northeastern corridor where it has been more prevalent, but our governor, Gina Raimondo, has done an amazing job understanding the pandemic and its impact in Rhode Island. We lead the nation now in testing on a per capita basis. Also have been very assiduous in contact tracing and other ways of bringing private sector resources to the table to help really understand what the correct progression and synchronization of reopening the economy is. So yeah, we've had our share of problems. We have rebounded very nicely over the course of the last decade or so. This is definitely a challenge for all of us that are in the economic development sphere, that are working on the education sphere, workforce. But we know that we will continue to have the business community be creative, innovative, learn ways to properly pivot and to seize new opportunities and to bring in and be very inclusive in their hiring practices as well. That's very, very evident, and one that is most definitely on the minds of the business and civic leaders throughout Rhode Island and throughout New England, and certainly throughout the country.
Thank you for sharing that. We have on a comment here from Jide Benson from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you so much for watching. We're having a global audience here. Debbie is watching from Washington, D.C., where she was my neighbor in my building, and social media has kept us connected. Paula says, we said like crazy people, we read the Sunday New York Times out loud, and there she is. And Paula is thanking Jide. So here, Tallahassee, talking right now to Providence, talking to New York, talking to Lagos, all happening simultaneously. No one could have imagined all of this happening. So we have just a few minutes left, and we want to play another excerpt from the Nick Kristof talk, and then we're going to play a little bit of videos about Jim Taricani, in whose memory Laurie has created the Taricani lecture series at the University of Rhode Island, focused on the First Amendment. And so let's see here. I'm going to bring in a video, and we'll just pick up the conversation with Nick and Sheryl. To make sure that, here, what are the steps from recognition to change? That's a question that's coming in from Frisbees on YouTube. Why don't we just go to that question right now?
So I think it becomes really important to look at the scope of the change. So, I mean, I think that there are lots of Americans who see a police officer kneeling on a African-American's neck, and they think that is outrageous and that has to stop. But the inequity runs much deeper than that. And I think we also have to look at structural inequities. And so, part of that is education, for example. And affluent Americans have a stake in a K through 12 education system that essentially advantages those who are already affluent and live in wealthy public school districts that so the U.S. is just about the only advanced country in the world that spends more money educating rich advantaged kids than disadvantaged kids who need the help more. And yet you certainly don't see a lot of calls to address this kind of structural inequity of K through 12 education. In housing, we have a system that in which zoning for single family ownership in affluent suburbs keeps prices up and makes it difficult for those of more modest means to move in these communities. And again, that is something that nobody's really particularly talking about. And so I hope that we will can broaden the conversation, because I think to really bring about change, we have to talk about educational inequity. We have to talk about economic inequity, and not just freeze frame this moment when a policeman has his knee on an individual's neck.
Now, you wrote a column on the importance of video as it pertained to George Floyd and that terrible video. Jim Taricani always said it was important that people see video to make things real. The irony of airing a videotape, which then, of course, landed Jim in home confinement. That's a comment that came in from Laurie White-Taricani. Tell us about the role that video has played in all of the things that we have seen, not just in the protests, but you also know that people are watching the president and deciding whether. So that question that excerpt we had already shown. Folks, you're watching the Taricani lecture series, the inaugural lecture by Nick and Sheryl WuDunn, Nick Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn. And now I would like to show a little bit of the videos about Jim Taricani, and then we'll close out for the night. So let me pull up here one of the interviews and pieces about Jim. So let's set this up. When you see the video, you'll know which one we're playing here. And if you want to set this up, Laurie, go ahead.
This is Jim talking about the importance of protecting sources, and this one right here was, I believe, one of the pieces, the summary pieces, when Jim passed away. So sort of a chronology of his life that was produced by NBC 10.
Okay, let's play this now.
As a young 20-something, Jim Taricani was actually pursuing a career in music.
I was in college and bumming around with some bands, and hopefully to make, this is back in the 70s.
And was trained on classical trumpet. He figured radio might be a good fallback career. Jim joined the Channel 10 News Department in 1979 as a general assignment reporter, covering snowstorms and other day-to-day events. When investigative reporter Paul Giacobbe left journalism to become a lawyer, Jim took over that role, and many of his stories were about the Rhode Island mob and its leader, Raymond Ellis Patriarca.
Patriarca's business, the National Cigarette Company on Atwells Avenue, will most likely be run now by his partner, Sam Carosa.
I just said, Dick, anyway.
I got this on videotape.
I don't care. Well, if I did,
I'll play it.
I didn't mean it that way, all right? I didn't mean it
What
that
did
way.
you mean?
We saw Jim's confrontational but fact-based interviewing style during his investigation of illegal waste dumping in Coventry, Johnston, and elsewhere in the 80s, with the mob getting a cut of the dumping fees. Other stories included the flow of illegal immigrants from Guatemala to Rhode Island and the illegal sale of black market guns. Jim left NBC 10 in 1995 to pursue a new career as press secretary to the newly elected Rhode Island Governor Lincoln Almond. Disgruntled by politics, Jim was back at NBC 10 about 2 years later and dealt with a personal medical need, the need for a new heart. After a heart transplant, he got right back into circulation, and a year or two after that, investigated and then became part of the Plunder Dome corruption investigation. Jim released a secret undercover videotape of a top CNC administration official accepting a bribe.
Federal Judge Ernest Torres called it an unpleasant task, sentencing a reporter that he has admired for many years. But he said what was at stake was the rule of law, which was violated.
In December of 2004, I-Team reporter Jim Taricani was sentenced in federal court to 4 months home confinement for refusing to say who gave him a tape showing a top CNC administration official taking a bribe. The sentence ended on April 9th in 2005.
I'm sure it's better than being in prison, but it's not something you want to do.
Jim spent the next few years doing something he did want to do, lobby the federal government for a reporter's shield law to prevent what happened to him from happening to other reporters. Jim spent 9 more years heading the I-Team until his retirement in 2014.
How does it feel to see that video And I saw you in there too.
Yeah, yep. We've been together since 1980. So I've spent my entire life, the bulk of my professional adult life with Jim. So it's pretty amazing to watch us both grow and change and evolve. And who knew when I was in journalism school that many years later, many decades later, I'd be sitting here talking about this issue in a macro sense with my alma mater and talking about my husband, who has become a national face for the First Amendment and for a federal shield law. And the New York Times and other national media outlets have covered Jim's case and his sentence quite extensively. And that was one of the reasons that procession of journalists, so 60 journalists from all over the country, came to Jim's funeral and acted as an honor guard, if you don't mind the expression, an honor guard wearing also quill pen pins to signify, just like you can see the logo and the branding of the Taricani lecture series, the quill pen, as a symbol of the free press. And Dan Barry, actually from the New York Times, led the procession of journalists. And Dan was a journalist in Providence at the Providence Journal, and he and Jim were very friendly as professional colleagues when he was at the Journal. And then subsequently, when Dan went to the New York Times, they continued their relationship. And Dan not only led the procession of journalists at the funeral, but he also wrote a very interesting and compelling op-ed piece, commentary piece that I refreshed my recollection on just this morning, just to remember, even though it was only 1 year ago, just the vividness of that day and how special it was to be able to have all of Jim's colleagues, dating all the way back to Jim's very first producer in the 1980s, when he was so very young back then. But anyway, he was very fearless. He was very brave, courageous in the fact of everything that he encountered in his life, including 2 heart attacks, a heart transplant, and then as a result of basic vascular disease, after he retired a few years ago, he did have an amputated leg, and then ultimately went on kidney dialysis. But despite all of those issues and all of those various major organs being compromised at some point in his life, he never complained. He was full of energy and was always cheering on reporters from his various social media feeds, and was very engaged in the news all the way up till the very end, and was a mentor to a lot of students and a lot of younger reporters that were coming into the business. And Jim was a particular fan of all things print. So when Sheryl in her piece said, "Well, we love video, we love TV, but we love print," and Jim would have definitely been smiling by that, because he too had a special affinity for print journalism. And yes, he was an assiduous reader of the New York Times every day, and especially on Sunday, the print version.
Thank you. Now, what we'd like to do is I want to say, look at this. Jacqueline says, a national face of the First Amendment. Mark says, love journalists who aren't afraid to tackle issues. May your memory be great. Rahadian says, may Jim Taricani's memory be a blessing. Paula says, Jim definitely sounds like someone I would like to have known and emulated his commitment to the truth. Thank you for sharing all of this with us. I hope the lecture series enlightens many students and others. And Jacqueline says, legacy building is what it is all about. When all is said and done, if we can influence positive change in people, policy, processes, and institutions, it has been a life well lived. God bless him. People are learning from everywhere. And Jonathan says, wonderful program and a great memorial. Thank you. And my father is watching from India, says, just joined you in the middle of an India-China situation. There was a lot of action at the border and lots of tension. So my father's been nonstop in television in India. But we do want to play this video that we have lined up here. So if you can tell us what we're about to see, if I can get this right. 1 second. But if you can filibuster for me while I set this up.
Okay. So Jim was, a leader, very highly respected journalist, very well trusted, very well known. He was a Rhode Island icon, as was mentioned in his eulogy, and also someone that believed, where Rhode Islanders believed he was on their side, and that's what Father Jared Costanza, who actually said, another portion of the eulogy talked about Jim was always on their side, being the public. So it was really interesting that Jim was a mentor and a friend and a colleague and a trusted person for advice, not just among his own colleagues at NBC 10 in Providence, but also among the competing TV stations, the CBS affiliate, the ABC affiliate, also within the print media and radio. We're very fortunate in Rhode Island and Providence to have very strong institutional media. And that's part of, that gives us the civic fabric that's so very important. But, the fact that folks in the middle of the day, the funeral was at 10 o'clock on a beautiful Thursday in June, and everybody just sort of dropped what they were doing and came down and participated in the funeral service. It was a beautiful procession of journalists from all types, radio, television, newspaper, local, national. Christiane Amanpour sent a special message from her international perch, and it was just so amazingly beautiful and gratifying and heartwarming.
All right, so let's watch this video, and this is as we get ready to end this conversation that we're reflecting on the career of Jim Taricani, and also hearing from Sheryl WuDunn and Nick Kristof, who have written about Jim and his crusade, and they gave the first Taricani lecture on the First Amendment today. So here we go.
This is a competing news station, by the way.
Nice. Oops, sorry.
Listen, here in Southern.
There we go.
New England has been laid to rest.
This morning, family, friends, colleagues, and officials all came together to say goodbye to Jim Taricani. Eyewitness News reporter Steve Nielsen tells us about today's services. Steve?
Well, Mike Shannon, more than 40 reporters stood with white ribbons pinned to them as Jim Taricani's honor guard. The sun gleamed off their motorcycles. The mounted command stood ready as the casket arrived.
That is the ultimate sign of respect. We reserve them for very special honors.
Investigative reporter Jim Taricani is walked by an honor guard of more than 40 journalists. Lives the watchdog reporter impacted over decades. Taricani died last week after battling various health conditions. He was 69.
Well, I both feared and admired him, and my admiration only grew after I left and went to the New York Times.
That's Times reporter Dan Barry. The two worked together in Providence in the 80s.
As the old saying goes, back then it was a reporter's theme park. There was so many things going on.
He said the reporters here aren't just standing for the person, but the actions he took to defend the First Amendment, like when Taricani famously served a federal sentence for refusing to reveal a confidential source.
What he represented in terms of the Fourth Estate and in terms of journalism, standing up for what's right.
The pallbearers carrying him to the service at Christ the King in South Kingstown Thursday included Target 12 investigator Tim White, former state police colonel Stephen O'Donnell, and Providence Police Chief Hugh Clements.
He was always fair, balanced.
Taricani earned multiple Emmy Awards and an Edward R. Murrow Award for investigative reporting. He's survived by his wife, Laurie White, the head of the Providence Chamber of Commerce. Beyond journalism, Taricani was remembered as a supportive husband, a talented chef, and a lover of music, especially rock and roll. I'm Steve Nielsen, Eyewitness News.
57.
Lover of rock and roll. That's awesome. What name some of his songs, please?
Oh, he loved the Beatles. He loved the Rolling Stones. He played the drums. He played the guitar. Played the keyboards. He just really enjoyed music of all kinds. And we used "Here Comes the Sun" as one of the anthems around the whole passing of Jim, understanding here comes the sun and the sunshine is a metaphor for letting sun shine in and being able to shine a spotlight on issues that might otherwise go undetected in the darkness.
So you may not know this, and it's unlikely you do, but every Saturday I have a spin-off radio show that's born out of this daily program, and it's on 99.5 FM WBAI, progressive radio station here in New York City. And for 12 weeks in a row, I've produced a 2-hour call-in radio show. And you haven't lived till you've produced a call-in radio show in New York City, because the kind of people that call in, they're just amazing characters. Anyway, for 12 weeks in a row, we opened the show. It's called Coping with COVID-19, a helpful, hopeful call-in show. And we play Here Comes the Sun. And when we started in March, it was, and in March, it was, middle of winter, and we never thought we'd come out of it. Even now, we're not out of it, right? Like, this is one of the problems, is that one part of America thinks the crisis is over. But as the new incoming dean of one of the medical schools said, that we may have forgotten COVID, but COVID has not forgotten us. We may have left COVID behind, but it hasn't left behind us. But every week to play Here Comes the Sun, and to be able to talk about it. Yeah, and they're available at WBAI.org. And it's a really, really special song, and I'm so glad that we have that connection to him. Let's look here. Sudha says, my husband also had transplant in Columbia Presbyterian. Jim was great, a very good tribute. And Mark says that, I remember applying for the Providence newspaper. We have great activist journalists here in Durham, North Carolina. Folks like Carl Kenny, Wilson, and Anthony Wilson, Ken Smith, Cash Michaels, what a name, Pam Salisbury, and Beverly Mahone, just to name a few. And that's really great. And these are some of the folks following in those footsteps. So that's really wonderful. I have to ask, Laurie, you are mourning Jim, and you're able to do this wonderful tribute to him. You had that funeral, and I know it's difficult because the anniversary is coming up and all of that. But talk to us about what it's like to think of everyone else. 100,000 people have died of the disease now, and people have not been able to have funerals. I know people who've died of other causes who've not been able to have funerals. That closure that a funeral gives family members is something that hundreds of thousands of people are missing in these 3 months.
Sree, that is an amazing question, and one that I not only think about daily, but I probably think about it hourly, because it was right around this time last year, he had been hospitalized for a number of weeks. And the idea that I wouldn't have been able to go to the hospital to see him. So he was in the hospital for 6 weeks, but can you imagine if I hadn't been able to see my husband? And I didn't realize that we were getting down to the bitter end. I actually thought he would come home and he would be, he would recover to the extent that he could recover, because he had done so many times, and he's had so many, illnesses, and he was always able to rally because he had a very fierce and determined mind. But the notion of thinking of people that can't visit their loved ones in hospitals when they are on their deathbeds, the notion of not being able to have a proper wake and funeral where you have loved ones and people coming in that can be supportive to you. The idea that the burial process now is so austere, and that the comfort when someone dies, someone that is close to you, whether it be a mother, a father, brother, sister, husband, anyone, partner, but taking solace from the comfort of others and others that can give witness and can sit and just be a presence and to be able to, feel and to encourage and many times not even say anything at all, just to be there, to be a presence and to be someone who can could feel the pain along with you. So the notion of being alone during a time like that or a time like this, when there are so many people that are dying, either dying alone and family members who don't feel as though that they had the closure that they would have liked to have had, and it's very it's heartbreaking, and you can't put it any other way. And folks in nursing homes, I have a very close friend whose mom is in a nursing home, and she has suffered from Alzheimer's, and she hasn't seen her in 3 months, and she doesn't know if she ever will.
So sad to think about that. I have to ask, you're someone who is very strong. Clearly, your partner of almost 40 years passes on. How did you have the strength to continue and do what you've been able to do, and especially through the last year with everything that's been going on in the world?
Well, I stumbled a little bit. I took the summer. I had a very slow summer. I took a little bit of time off, and it's a lot when, at least I took it very hard, and it took me some time to be able to get my enthusiasm back. And again, it did catch me as a little bit of a surprise. I don't know why it did, because he had suffered through all these maladies and was a frequent guest at our various hospitals, but he had fantastic doctors led by Dr. Hub Brennan, Dr. Guy Lancelotti, took amazing care of him, all the nurses and the CNAs and the physical therapists and the dialysis professionals. And they, I felt their love and their compassion. So I just spent, several months, like maybe 2 or 3 months, just absorbing it, coming to grips with it, and living with it. You have to live with it. You can't shut out the pain, because it'll just come boomeranging back at some point. So you have to really feel the pain, because if you don't feel the pain, then something's wrong. So I tried to look at it in that respect, and I use the word gratitude, just so grateful to have had so many wonderful things that gave Jim, a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh chance, great medical care. And I also want to point out that organ transplantation was a very big cause and issue that Jim wanted to talk about. He counseled a lot of heart disease patients who had heart attacks or needed bypass surgery or other things, and showed them, how to be brave. And he also spent a lot of time talking with people who were suffering serious illnesses, not the least of which being the need for a heart transplant. So he had a heart transplant when he was 46, and he had his first heart attacks when he was at 36. So he lived with heart disease, very significant heart disease, through the bulk of his professional life. So all these things didn't just kind of sort of happen at the end. It happened, very early as a very young man. So he was so appreciative of the gift of life and the gift of being able to receive a heart, and to be able to, cherish the heart that he was given, and to honor his heart. He always talked about that. Every day when he would get up, he would say that my job today is to honor the heart that I have in my chest, beating in my chest, the gift of life that was made possible by the parents of a young man who authorized and granted and created the possibility for Jim to receive a transplant at Mass General in Boston.
And remind us how many years he got with that heart?
He had the heart transplant in 1996. So he almost made it. He almost made it to his anniversary, which is August 22nd. So, one more month, 1.5 more months, and he would have made it.
For 23 years. That's incredible. Yeah. That's all extra life, right? And you had that, and you had that together with him. Before we go, we've got to play one more clip from Nick and Sheryl right at the end. A question with those breaking news today about the Justice Department suing to block on behalf of Donald Trump the John Bolton book that's about to come out. So let's play that right now. Here we go, and here it is. There we go.
Well, so so I don't know the basis for it, but I assume that it is that the administration is suing on the grounds that he did not fulfill his legal obligations to clear material before publication.
Correct.
And I trust the courts. I think that it's fine for the administration to pursue legal remedies. I think that it is exceedingly unlikely that a court will grant prior restraint. And so I don't think that remedy will succeed in blocking publication, but I don't object to somebody pursuing legal remedies. What I object to is more the bullying, the evasions of law, and the attempts to go after publishing companies, for example, or companies that own publishing companies, and punish them in their business interests because of what they publish. But I don't think that a lawsuit, I don't think that a court will grant prior restraint on the John Bolton book. So I think it's a signal to Trump supporters rather than a genuine effort to stop publication.
Thank you, Nick and Sheryl. Before you go, every book event that you go to, there's a selfie that people want to take with you. We can't quite do that, but we have another way. So we're going to put you on full screen, and I want everyone who has a camera with them to take a selfie with Nick and Sheryl. So I'm going to do that as well. We're going to put you on full screen right now so that we can take that photo. So I'm going to turn around here, and we'll have you on full screen so that we can take a picture with you. Yeah. Everybody do this. Everyone, please take a picture right now with Nick and Sheryl and post it, tagging them at WuDunn and at Nick Kristof and the Laurie White-Taricani. I see Laurie is doing it. The Dean is doing it. Everyone, please do this right now. This is your selfie moment with Nick Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn. I am so grateful to both of you for your time and your wisdom and your insights. I know it's hard to keep smiling, but we need those smiles. Keep them up.
Absolutely. And thank you, Sree, so much.
Thank you so much, all of you.
And the whole URI community.
Yes. And outstanding discussion. People are giving us thumbs up. Outstanding, brilliant. Love the discussion. All these great comments are coming in. Now I'm going to pass this back. All right. So that was the session just a few hours ago, though it becomes longer and longer as we stay here. When we started, it was 90 minutes ago. This is supposed to be an hour. Laurie, you stayed for so long. I'm so grateful. Anu throws us some hearts. Thank you, Anu, as we were just talking about the value and the importance of the heart. And so before we go, we have a ritual here that comes out of my conversation with Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, the Columbia Law School professor who coined the term intersectionality 30 years ago. And she said to me, and above everything else, she said, say their names of the folks who've been killed in this spate of violence over the last few years. And so, Laurie, if that's okay, I would be honored if you would join me in saying their names and reading the names of George Floyd and others. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you for doing that. It is, just want to tell people that it's hard for some folks to listen, but I think it's important that you do, because as Professor Crenshaw said, that this is the a very important way in which we can pay tribute and make a difference with everything that's happening now. I'm using this cover of Time magazine. Look at that cover of A Mother and Child by Titus Kaffer, this painting. But it's actually made based on this photograph of young George Floyd with his mother, Larcinia Floyd. I'm just, every time I see this, we've been doing this for several days now, and I'm just so overwhelmed by seeing this photo and this in juxtaposition. But here are the names. And so if you wouldn't mind, read a few names, and then I'll read a few, and we'll switch back and forth. So we'll let you get started.
Okay. Trayvon Martin, Yvette Smith, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tanisha Anderson,
Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Jerame Reed, Natasha McKenna, Eric Harris, Walter Scott,
Freddie Gray, William Chapman, Sandra Bland, Darius Stewart, Samuel DuBose, Janet Wilson,
Kaylin Rockmore, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Joseph Mann, Terrence Crutcher, Chad Robertson,
Jordan Edwards, Aaron Daly, Stefan Clark, Danny Ray Thomas, Antoine Rose,
Botham John, Tatiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor.
and George Floyd.
And to that list, we have to add the name of Rayshard Brooks, who was killed in Atlanta, shot and killed on Saturday night. And you saw that terrible video of a man who was asleep in his car, may have been drunk, but didn't deserve to die that night, and shot and killed by a police officer in a scuffle. And this is part of what we're trying to do, Laurie, is to understand on this show the various inequalities in this country, and the racial divide is one of them, the economic divide, the health divide. And in our shows for 97 days, it's hard to imagine that we've been covering various aspects of this. We obviously were not focused on the racial inequality early enough, but that has all come to much more attention in the last few weeks. But we are very grateful to all our viewers, including Laurie White, who watches as often as she can, I know, because she comes into our comments and speaks with us and shares as well. And my mom is watching in Trivandrum. Hi, Amma. Love you. She says, today, 6 years back this day, we were both in New York. You, Rupa, and the children organized a wonderful birthday party for your dad, inviting our friends in your apartment. That's right. My dad's birthday is tomorrow. That's Wednesday, and here it's still Tuesday, but it's Wednesday in New York, in New Delhi, in India. So happy birthday, Acha, if you're watching. We love you all very much, and we're all grateful for everything that we all have. And I think the legacy of Jim Taricani is multiple, obviously, including the importance of the First Amendment, fighting to keep your sources safe, going after the bad guys, and doing investigative journalism, but also, as he said, honoring his heart every day. He got a heart transplant 23 years before he eventually passed, and was able to use that heart and then honor that heart every day. And I think we should all honor our hearts, even if they're our own from birth. I think it's a very special idea. Thank you, Laurie, for sharing that with us. We're very grateful. And Mark says his dad's birthday is June 20th. So that's coming up on Saturday. And we'll be interviewing Jacqueline Dolly on Saturday. And Mark, maybe you'll come on and say, talk about your father for a little bit. But before we go, I want to remind everyone what we have coming up. Today is just part of our 100th week celebration, as we're talking about all the things that we are covering and talking about. We met yesterday the director of the USC Equities Institute on race, Suman Pendakor. Today we met Laurie White-Taricani and Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn. Tomorrow we are meeting Mitchell Silver, who I am so proud to call a former colleague. When I was chief digital officer of New York City, he was my colleague as NYC Parks Commissioner. And there's Mitchell Silver. He'll be with us. He's the AICP president-elect, past president of the American Planning Association, passionate about planning, parks, and public space. Mitchell_Silver. Everybody follow him. And you must read this post. As a black man, head of an agency with many black men on staff, I shared directly my personal anguish in support of our community and all who condemn racism, discrimination, injustice, violence, and dehumanization. Now I'm ready to share with you. Took him a few days to do that. Enough is enough. And so that's going to be a very special show with our friend. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to take that off the screen. So let me do that one more time so that you can see what I was reading. And I'm sorry that Laurie and others would have been confused. This is Mitchell Silver, and I want everybody to follow him, Mitchell_Silver, NYC Parks Commissioner, AICP President-elect. Please do follow Mitchell_Silver, and tell him that you're looking forward to seeing his interview tomorrow on this show so that people can see it and understand a little bit about the work he's doing. And then Thursday noon Eastern Time, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, WHO's chief scientist, will be here, and Dr. Sylvia Bryan, director of pandemics at WHO, will be here. Will be an incredibly important conversation. Please, everyone, tune in. And then on Friday, we'll have our 100th episode. We'll go for 2 hours from 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern at least. We will mark Juneteenth, the end of slavery, and our guests will include Professor Noliwe Brooks, who is the W.E.B. Du Bois Professor at Cornell University. Can you imagine having that title? And Brandy Harden, lawyer and board member at Justice Aid, will be with us. And we'll have other special guests, including Jonathan Borstein, who's watched 100.
99 shows. Tomorrow will be 100 shows.
Yeah, that'll be amazing. So we're very
Union
grateful.
Square.
Yeah, from Union Square, as you know. So it'll be great to have everybody here. And Paul is just explaining what we were just doing. And Mark says his dad turns 80 on Saturday. Maybe we'll bring him on with you if you want to do that as well. That'll be cool. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to Laurie and thank everybody for watching.
Thank you, Sree.
I want to, of course, thank our sponsors one more time, Art & Co, artandco.net. Get involved with the world's largest online art auction, fundraising for COVID-19 victims. Also, sponsor message from Rutgers Global Entrepreneurship Experience, a virtual teen camp. 20% off code with the code Sree, S-R-E-E, globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org. Take a screenshot. globalentrepreneurshipexperience.org, a virtual teen camp. And then also a reminder about Muckrack, the fundamentals of social media, a free certification course coming June 17th, mrac.co/social. mrac.co/social. Almost 4,000 people have signed up already. You will want to sign up. It launches tomorrow. It's not live. It's on demand. And you can join anytime, mrac.co/social. And last item, please join us as we celebrate Father's Day with an epic day of shows. And we start in the morning with Tom Jolly, the print editor of the New York Times. And we end in the evening with a special surprise show. Well, it's not a surprise, but I'm going to tell you, my children, my 17-year-old twins who endured lockdown for 100 days with their old man and mom, and who have had their SATs canceled and everything for 3 months, have kindly agreed to come on my show and talk about what it's like to be a teenager in New York during the pandemic. So they'll be with us in the evening. And on both shows, you can honor a father figure in your life, a grandfather, uncle, male role model. You submit your picture and a message to be read on the air. Just go to digimentors.link/Father's Day, or just email me, Sree@Sree.net. I'll explain how it works. Digimentors.link/Father's Day. So please do sign up for that. And last, I want to tell you about a special show on Sunday that I'm involved with, that I'm very proud of. My colleagues and friends, Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian, who've been on the show multiple times, have launched their own show. It's called She's on Call. And these two amazing female doctors will be hosting a show that will be on every single Sunday. You can go back and watch last Sunday's show. This was the debut episode with Dr. Dara Kass and Dr. Hafia El Tahir. It was fantastic. And this week on Sunday, among their guests is the doctor who wrote about the rubber bullets and what they do to people. She wrote a piece in the Washington Post that you won't want to miss. And we'll talk all about that. So please follow She's on Call at She's on Call on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn, and check out what they're posting and what they're sharing. We're very excited and honored to be able to tell these medical stories. And last but not least here, Laurie, I know you're still there. I'm sorry. I just want to say, Paula says, thank you, Laurie. And Barbara says,
thank you, Paula.
Great show, Laurie and Sree. And Jacqueline says, I love it. Yes, teen power. And Jacqueline will be my guest on Saturday. So you saw the entire week-long show, then Saturday and Sunday. Saturday is Jacqueline Dolly, and Sunday is my twins will be here. And Jacqueline says it debuted on her birthday. So happy birthday, Jacqueline. And everybody please connect and follow Jacqueline too. Well, final word to you, Ms. White.
Can I show my shirt?
Yes, of course. Yes, please, please. So let's read that out loud. I'll read it. It says, or you can read it.
Let you read it.
Okay. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press. That's part of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And when you flip it around on this shirt, it says, what part of no law don't you understand? And that's the Media Law Resource Center. Great shirt. And there's a story. You're wearing Jim's version of that shirt. And then you're holding up, there you go. We can see it. And you're holding up, the shirt you're holding up is yours, but you remember to wear Jim's. And that's a very touching way to end this story. And Radyan says, great shirt. And we are just so grateful to everybody for being here. And Laurie will leave you with a final word.
I just want to thank you so much, Sree, for sharing in this discussion and helping all of us learn about these issues like you do every night for the past 99 nights. I know I personally have learned so much from you and your guests and all of your folks that write in and are engaging and are part of the show. So I can't think of anyone more qualified to talk about this very important issue than someone like you, who has been able to approach it from a very serious and academic perspective, given your vast experience and also your legacy at Columbia University School of Journalism.
Thank you. And I'm enjoying my new perch. I'm a visiting professor, but we were all trying to be, I have the title digital innovation in my title. So I've got to try new things. And that's what I'm trying to do here. With that, it's been 146 minutes. It's been almost 100 plus minutes of this show. We're very grateful to Laurie for being here and to all of you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow night with Mitchell Silver, the Parks Commissioner of New York City. And then on Thursday at noon, you will meet the chief scientist of WHO. How awesome is that going to be? And then on Friday, our epic 2+ hour scheduled show about the to celebrate our 100th episode, as well as Juneteenth, which we'll be doing. With that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you, Laurie, and I'll hit goodbye here. Thanks, everybody. Please email me, Sree@sree.net. We want your ideas, topics, and sponsors. Bye.